After over a quarter of a century in the city, curator Richard Drury is a well-known face on Prague's art scene. The Englishman, who studied Czech at Cambridge, works at the Gallery of Central Bohemia and is also the head of the fine arts section of Umělecká beseda, a cultural association that began way back during the days of the Czech National Revival. Our tour of Richard Drury's Prague begins by Bílá Hora in Prague 6, at the Hvězda game reserve, which gets its name from the star-shaped summer palace at its heart.
The first bit of Prague I came to know was Břevnov, because I came to summer schools of Czech in the late 1980s, and Břevnov was that kind of area where we were staying. And then I got a flat in Břevnov, so that was my sort of dream fulfilled. And from our flat down at Břevnov, we'd come up here to the Hvězda hunting park for fresh air and sort of really to get back to nature a bit, because Prague is quite green, but you know, down the city there's all the sort of noise and the trams and the tourists and stuff, and Hvězda really is that kind of opportunity to come and enjoy a bit of tranquility.
How do you think in general Prague does parks? For example, London has grand parks, Paris has for me the most beautiful parks in the world. How do you think Prague does parks?
I think it does parks much better than it used to, and it's not just about sort of cleaning them up and making them more sort of user-friendly. It's also to do with this thing that the British are very used to, and that's the idea of community space. For the British, the park is a place, sure, for rest and recreation, but it's a kind of a space for meeting people. You know, you can take your picnics and stuff. And the Czechs, really, this kind of under communism, what was public space was state space, and what was state space was no one's space. And so the Czechs are sort of slowly getting used to the fact that, you know, public areas like parks belong to them and can be used by them for this kind of, you know, as a dimension of community life. So that's what I'm, you know, really happy to see happening now.
You mentioned that this was a hunting ground. What else do you know about the history of this place?
Not a huge amount. Yes, of course, I could say it was, I don't know, founded, you know, trying to sound wise, looking at my crib sheet here, founded in the 1530s by Ferdinand I, and then the building itself, Hvězda, was built by his son Ferdinand II in the 1550s. You know, and the connection with White Mountain, the Battle of White Mountain, and the, you know, heroic national defeat, which really sort of brings to mind the performances of the English football team the last 30 years, one heroic defeat after another. So it has, yes, there are echoes of history, most definitely. It's a park with a memory.
You were saying that you used to live here in Břevnov, now you live in Davice, which is quite by Břevnov. How have you found this whole area as a place to live over the years?
It's been great, really has. I mean, to be honest with you, my heart belongs to Břevnov. It's a little village perched up on the hill behind Prague Castle and lives its own little life. And so I really like it that way. Down in Davice, it's sure, beautiful buildings. It's gone quite upmarket. It's a lovely place to live. But there's something about Břevnov that captured my heart back in 1987, and it stayed that way. But I mean, the one thing I'm following is a sort of what we'd call the gentrification of Prague 6. Because I remember, you know, the White Lion pub on Bělá Street. It was a real spit and sawdust pub. When I went there for the first time, there was this old woman sitting with her half-litre glass of beer, and the glass seemed bigger than she was, and it was just a wonderful little sort of drop of local colour, which is now being, you know, sort of pushed up market and sterilised.
And it's all hipster cafes everywhere.
It is. I mean, I'm a good one for a coffee, as the next man is, but really, yes, it's this kind of this coffee pastry culture seems to be kind of pushing the more genuine sort of social features of Prague 6 kind of to the margins.
From Hvězda, Richard Drury and I hop on a tram down to the Újezd area, at the edge of Malá Strana on the left bank of the river. There, at number 3 Besední Street, is where you'll find the small theatre Divadlo na Prádle. But the spot has an older history, and one linked to a venerable institution close to my guide's heart.
This building, Besední dům, it was built and opened in 1926, as the kind of the centre, the home for the Umělecká beseda Arts Association, which was founded in 1863 as a way of kind of really bringing Czech culture up to a kind of European standard. It was an effort to really sort of show the rest of Europe that Czech culture is really on an equal standing. So Umělecká beseda is really interesting for the fact that it brings together under one sort of roof, as it were, musicians. There's a music section, artists, a fine arts section, and literature. There's a literature and dramatic section. The idea of the association was to bring people together from different sort of artistic fields to really kind of communicate and organise, joint events together. And so Besední dům belonged to the association in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. However, after the war, with the nationalisation of property, our association lost this building and never got it back. It's something similar to the Marnes Association that never got its building back. We exist and work, should we say, on the basis of being a prestigious homeless community, because we don't have our building, and so we're continually looking for temporary homes, which isn't a problem for the artists, because they do their exhibitions when we're offered a venue, we'll do an exhibition there.
What's your role in the organisation?
Well, for the last 8 years, I've been the chairman of the fine arts section of Umělecká beseda, which is sort of funny in a way, because beseda is such a Czech cultural phenomenon, so closely tied with the most, should we say, the purest values of Czech culture, being founded, for instance, by Bedřich Smetana and Josef Marnes, that to be a member of this association as an Englishman, there has to be an irony there. But it says, I think, something for Czech tolerance that they took me on board, and as a foreigner, I do my bit to promote and cultivate the artistic values here.
If you no longer have this building, where do you typically meet?
Our committee meetings take place in the studio of the sculptor Olbram Zoubek, the well-known Czech sculptor Olbram Zoubek, he's a member of our association, and he was in fact what we call the mayor of Umělecká beseda, which is the kind of the big, the boss, as it were, and he's a great supporter, and so we always meet up at his studio. He sits at the end of the table. He doesn't hear as well as he used to, but he loves the company and the gossip and the news, and he always has a good bottle of Slivovica, so that always lubricates the kind of conversation. We always leave his studio with a sense of well-being.
And where is his studio?
His studio is in Salmovská Street, which is just a little bit up from Charles Square. And it's really a little world in its own right, because it's in a courtyard, and Zoubek keeps all his sculptures parked outside, and so you walk to his studio through a kind of a forest of 2-metre bronze and concrete figures.
Very slim figures.
Yes, that's right. And so it's a wonderful place to meet. It's a misfortune that we don't have our own official building, but it's wonderful that we can meet up in such a special place and with such a special person at the head of the table.
Our final port of call is also linked to the Prague arts scene. The Literární kavárna, or literary cafe, on Řetěžová Street is a cosy, informal meeting place for local culture vultures of all generations. On the Friday early evening when we visit, Richard Drury seems to run into one acquaintance after the other.
It's a place I don't come to so often anymore, but from the sort of 1990s and after the turn of the century, I used to come here a lot. And why? Because the gallery where I still work, but which is now based in Bílá Hora, was based in Husová Street. It was called the Czech Museum of Fine Arts, now called the Gallery of the Central Bohemian region. And after work, we'd come here to the literary cafe, and you come in, and it's like a pub, really, for the British. You walk in, and you'll see the regulars, all the people you know, and it's one of those classic kind of time machines. You walk in, the sun's shining and you're sober. You walk out, it's midnight, and you're not sober. And where did the time go? Who knows? Talking, gossiping, talking about culture. The idea of the Prague Cafe is a little bit, I would say, more legend than substance. But in this case, with the Literary Cafe, there's a lot of substance.
For me, there's something very Czech about the name of this place. I think Czech intellectuals are really proud of being intellectuals. I don't know if the British or Irish equivalent would be called the Literary Cafe.
Definitely not. As is well known, the British have a complete phobia of intellectuals and philosophers, whereas for the Czechs, not having, an aristocracy, I think they have this kind of respect, and is part of the national psyche is to have this kind of intelligentsia. And I must say that, in the culture sphere, you find a lot of people who do feel that they're part of a special layer of society. They're quite self-aware. They know where they are in society.
Apart from this cafe, what other cafes do you like in Prague?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not such a kind of a social animal, or certainly not as social as I used to be. I'll tell you what, another interesting sort of Czech institution that's existed, I guess, since the 1980s is the Blatnička Winery. It really is like taking a step back into the 1980s.
Where is that?
That's in, I think, Michalská Street. So, just a stone's throw from the old town square. And there's a sort of a downstairs section where you see sort of people meeting who really kind of, I think they enjoyed the 1980s so much they never want to leave it. And so it's like stepping back in time, but in a nice way.
What about pubs? Have you got a favourite pub in Prague?
I don't really know. To be honest with you, I kind of have a little bit of a problem with Czech pubs. The beer is great, but people do tend to kind of shout at each other. This is the sort of problem. A British pub with its carpets is all about people talking with each other, whereas the Czech pub with its smoke-filled air and its neon lighting is where people talk at each other, and it's not my idea of a cosy evening.